Everyone has heard of the compound interest effect, the holy grail of wealth building. But if this effect is really so powerful and works with little money, why aren't we all rich? Is there a catch, or are we just doing something wrong? We'll clarify that today at Northern Finance. My name is Alex Bleck. Glad you tuned in again today. Albert Einstein is said to have once remarked that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Those who understand it earn it. All others pay it. Whether he actually said that is not clearly established. He probably didn't say it. But if we already misunderstand, what else do we misunderstand about the compound interest effect? The fact is, compound interest grows exponentially, as mathematicians would say. It doesn't increase linearly at a steady rate, but rather shoots up significantly after some time. Let's assume you have a really excellent investment that indeed brings you a 10% return per year. With that, you're happy and satisfied, so you just let it continue running. In the first year, you make a one-time investment of €1,000 and end up with €1,100. In the second year, it grows to €1,210. In the third year, we reach €1,331, and in the fourth year, €1,464. Let's just continue this all the way into the 40th year, as we have been doing, and see where it takes us. By then, we suddenly have more than €45,000 in assets. And if we plot this value development on a chart, we see that the curve really becomes exponential towards the end. And this effect becomes stronger the longer we hold our investment. And that with just an investment of €1,000 and nothing more afterwards. The money just simply stayed there, safely and securely worked for you in your account. So theoretically, we can all become incredibly rich, even if we start with small amounts. Let's conduct a thought experiment. If we were stranded on a deserted island with trees like those in the background, but not much else, and we are a few people with nothing but our clothes, then the first task would be to provide food, for example, by fishing on the beach with our bare hands. This is not efficient, but it's enough, because at least one person from the group catches a big fish per day, which is sufficient to feed everyone. Over time, the group gets a bit better and catches 3 fish a day. This feeds everyone more than enough, and also gives one person in the group time to build a first hut and start a fire, which makes the fish last longer. This creates even more available time, and you no longer have to go fishing each and every day, but can now do other things, such as making tools like fishing nets or a hammer, which makes you even more efficient and only needs one fisherman to supply everyone. The others then dedicate themselves to other tasks like building better huts, and in this way, this small island economy can continue to grow and become more efficient by investing in tools or productive capital. Those who act this way benefit in the long term. This is how it works in the real economy. When an investment goes well and others follow, an exponential development occurs. However, most people find it difficult to imagine this because we think linearly, not exponentially. That's why the compound interest effect is even possible, and when we reinvest the returns, the wealth grows incredibly fast. And that sounds amazing at first, one must say, especially for people who want to save a little each year, and later want to have more and live better. For them, the compound interest effect is something great, but there is a big problem. It doesn't work for most people, and there are 3 major reasons for this. Let's start with the first reason, which is the life cycle of saving. Most people typically work only for a certain period, usually 35 to 45 years, and increasingly start working and earning money later, around the age of 21. And they hope to retire at approximately 60 or 65, thus working for about 45 years. So you can't save your entire life and maximize the compound interest effect, because you have these 2 phases at the beginning and the end of your life where you live off your savings. At the beginning, it's the savings from your parents, and at the end, it's your own savings. And essentially, the compound interest effect reverses here. When you are young and go to school, you don't earn money, just like later in retirement, but you consume what has already been built up, either by your parents or by yourself, and then eventually health problems increase later on, along with the costs. This means that the development of wealth rather reverses and looks more like you don't start at 0, but in the negative range. For me, for example, it was my student loan from the KfW Bank of €14,000, which I had to repay with 9% interest after my studies. Let's just assume you pay off the loan in, for example, 5 years, and after that you are debt-free. For some it takes longer, for others shorter. Let's just assume that now. After that, you invest €1,000 every year and not just once. With that, you build wealth more than 7,700 euros year 11. But then a big unexpected expense comes up because your car is a total loss. You use up your savings and also take out a loan here. Now you are at minus 4,500 euros in assets and you can pay off your debts quickly again, which is good, and you reach over 40,000 euros in assets by year 31. But then there's another setback to 20,000 euros. The health insurance doesn't fully cover your rehabilitation treatment, but you need it to get back in shape. Accordingly, you need this money, you continue on, and in the end, after 40 years of work, you have built up 54,000 euros in assets, in this example with setbacks. Now let's assume again that you can invest the same 1,000 euros every year with the same return, but this time without any initial debt and without setbacks. With that, we don't end up with 54,000 euros after 40 years, but 487,000 euros, which is 9 times as much. Imagine that. Here you can clearly see that the compound interest effect is much less effective when you don't have ideal conditions, i.e. when you take real life into account. That's why it's so absolutely crucial that you definitely don't touch your investments, but instead have enough money in your emergency fund or piggy bank for potential expenses. Otherwise, you'll ruin the compound interest effect, as these graphs impressively show. The second major reason why compound interest doesn't make you rich is inflation. Currently, inflation in Europe is reported at 2.3%, but I personally notice much more than that. And among economists, it's also generally considered that the inflation figures from Europe are too low compared to America. If the Americans used the same method as we do in Europe, their US inflation would officially be significantly lower, about 1% lower than it is today. Either way, inflation is the biggest tax on your wealth and also on your compound interest effect, aside from official taxes. Because there was never a vote on how high inflation should actually be or whether there should be any at all. The ECB simply prints more money no matter what you think. Inflation ensures that debtors have an easier time repaying their debts because the outstanding debts naturally lose some value over time, the higher the inflation and the longer the loan lasts. The state is the largest debtor there is, and of course it benefits the most from inflation, such as if 10-year German government bonds were still paying around 5% in the year 2000, as seen here, they first fell to 3%, then to 2%, and then to 1%, and in 2020 even slipped into the negative range, which after deducting inflation means a real return of minus 2.5% per year for investors. A dream scenario for any debtor. The German state therefore indeed had to repay far less than it actually borrowed here. In 2025 the situation is different. The interest rates for the state are slightly higher again. However, after inflation and the debt package, we are at 0.3% real interest for 10-year government bonds. And this year's easier debt repayment is financed by the dwindling purchasing power of the population in the Eurozone. One must say it as it is, because their money is being diluted. Investment must grow by inflation rate and taxes. Wealth in 30-40 years will be worth less, mainly due to inflation. To have 1 million euros eventually, assuming a 2% annual inflation rate, if, for example, we want to have a wealth of 1 million euros at the end and assume an inflation rate of 2% annually, which is the official target of the ECB, then 40 years later we only have a purchasing power of 452,000 euros for what is 1 million today. In fact, we would need to increase our target to 2.2 million euros to reach the same value as 1 million euros today. And lastly, your wealth doesn't just grow due to the compound interest effect. Asset prices are also rising simultaneously. Real estate in Germany experienced a long rally since 2008, with 14 years of rising prices, and despite the setback in 2023, prices have risen again in 2024. This makes it increasingly difficult to fulfill the dream of owning your own property. Stocks and ETFs, especially in the USA, also have historically high valuations, record valuations, and you currently get fewer shares for your money. The price-to-earnings ratio for the S&P 500 is currently over 26. You are paying 26 times the last year's earnings for the stocks, which is really very, very high. As you can see in the almost century-long chart of the price-to-earnings ratio of the S&P 500, the ratio was lower 100 years ago, with values between 20 at the peak and 8 at the low point, which remained the same during World War II. Immediately after, the value dropped greatly, but then remained stable for a long time around 15. before another crash occurred, and from the 90s onwards consistently high values were observed. During economic crises, the values were particularly high because profits collapsed, but you can already see very well here that historically we don't have much room left for price growth if profits don't increase significantly in the coming years. The current value of 26.27 is simply too high. If the value had only been at an average of 11, like in the 80s, some in our community still benefited from those low valuations back then. For some, it's already their parents' generation. If we had such low values today, you could get more than twice as many shares for the same money in your savings plan. So invest consciously, and not everything in the USA, even if things have gone well. These are the 3 factors that prevent you from becoming rich with the compound interest effect, although it can work so strongly for you. You can still make it, but if you know these factors here that work against you, you have a significantly better chance of becoming rich and also achieving financial freedom. What are thoughts on the compound interest effect? Is it unrealistic for most people or not? Do you use it for yourself? Tell me in the comments below. I look forward to the exchange and wish you a good return. See you next time.